Okay, so we're sitting here, and it's April 11th, 2009, and I'm sitting in the kitchen of Kit Robinson talking about the Messianic Trees, selected poems 1976 to 2003. And so let's just start with the question, Kit. So your Selected has just recently come out from Adventures in Poetry, and why should we be reading your Selected? You're somebody who's been very prolific over the years, and what is the advantage of the Selected, or what were you thinking of, say, aesthetically, when you put the Selected poems together?
Well, a short answer is there's a lot of material here that's out of print. So it starts with the Dolch Stanzas, which was published by Barrett Watten's This Press in 1976, and that book's
32 years ago.
Chapbook. It's been out of print for a long time. So a lot of and that's true for a fair amount of especially the early part of the book. But beyond that, what I like about it is it has a nice shape, and the shape consists of a bunch of smaller shapes that are the works that go into it. I've done a lot of work in serial form. So, for example, there's a section called Ice Cubes, and then I did it again a few years later. And these are very narrow poems with one word on a line and 4 lines per stanza. So there's a series of those. There are lots of series, and some of them have fat lines, some have thin lines, some are in prose, some use the field. And so, and actually some of my books have a variety like that in them. So the books that James Sherry's Roof Press did, Ice Cubes and Balance Sheet, each of those consists of 3 types or 3 forms. So there's a front section, a middle section, and an end section. They all look very different. But by putting them all together in this book, you're able to see it's very shapely. So that's what I like about it, is it has a nice shape. But also I think for readers who may not be that familiar with my work, it's just a great way to get acquainted with the work all under one cover, rather than looking here and there for different books.
So it's both like a compendium or sort of a sampler of your work over the many years, over 30 years you've been publishing, and also it itself has its own shapings, and you worked very hard on this process of shaping as you selected from your work. Is that?
Yeah, I started thinking about it, I guess, maybe almost 10 years ago. And if you look at the table of contents, you can see the books that went into it. And I guess there's
about 13 books.
I think there's about 13 books. I've done 17. Some aren't in here, but most of them are. But you won't find references to those books in the text itself. There's no dividers or anything. So the works simply follow one another. And you can sort of see separations in terms of the way they look on the page, but those don't necessarily correspond to different books.
Now, working with Adventures in Poetry is fascinating to me. They're a relatively new press, I believe.
Well, they've been reborn. Larry Fagan started Adventures in Poetry in the 60s, I think. And when I first encountered the poetry scene in New York, and especially around St. Mark's Place in the late 60s, Adventures in Poetry was a magazine.
Oh, okay, I didn't realize that.
It was a Mimeo magazine, like C Magazine, which had been published by Ted Berrigan, or Angel Hair, which was published by Lewis Warsh and Ann Waldman. And so I used to, read Adventures in Poetry, and I think Larry did books under the Adventures in Poetry. I'm sure he did, although I can't remember exactly which ones. But, he did that into the 70s. And then I think, he stopped doing it for quite a while. And the current incarnation of Adventures in Poetry is a partnership with Chris Madison, who has a lot of experience as a publisher, editor, and translator. He's done a lot of translation from Russian. And so I think, Chris pretty much handles the design and distribution kind of the business end of the press, and Larry's more focused on the editorial side.
Let's talk one more issue about the book itself. Talk about the cover, the artwork on the cover, and is there any inspiration in the artwork or the any relationship to the text?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of a long story on this. The work, there's a piece of art on the cover by a Brazilian artist named Elio Oiticica. And I first encountered this work when I got an email from the poet and art critic Vincent Katz, who had written a review of a show of Oiticica's at the Tate Gallery in London. And there was a series of paintings that Oiticica did in the 50s called metaschemas that I liked a lot. They were geometric, they were very dynamic, abstract, really energetic. And I immediately thought, well, this would be great, for the book, which we were already working on at that time. And it took a while, actually, to get permission to use this one. But Chris Madison was able to do that, and I was really happy that he did. One of the things that's kind of fascinating about this piece, if you probably don't notice it right away, but it looks like a jumble of rectangles that are kind of dancing on each other and all slightly askew.
They also almost look like books sort of dancing on a library shelf, or
could be books. We knew we didn't want to have a picture of trees. That was that was something we knew. Yeah,
nothing to illustrate the title.
You want to illustrate the title, but they look sort of skewed and random, as if they were neatly stacked and then there was an earthquake. But if you study them, and this is true actually of the whole series, it's completely symmetrical. So,
each piece
it's actually
fits with the other pieces.
The left and right are exact reflections of each other.
So if you were to divide the piece in half, that each is a mirror image, or
That's right.
a reverse mirror image?
Well, something like that.
And do you feel your poetry
No.
relates somehow to the structural method of?
No, not really. But I do think that there's a sense of things being slightly skewed or at odd angles that I can relate to.
Skewed, but also structured.
Yeah. Yeah, because as I was saying, a lot of times I'll do work in a serial form, so I know that I'm going to do maybe a certain number, or may not have no number, but that once I find a mode that I can work in, then experience, emotion, language, thought, dream, all of that material becomes available because I have a mode that I'm working in. So the mode might correspond to the frame of the picture here, and so there can be a lot of variation within any given item in the series, and there can be variation from item to item in the series, but it's this similarity of the mode going through all of it that gives you some kind of consistency.
Let's start.
Should we stop it there?